You're 19. It's 11:40 at night, and you've got $4 in change sitting in the cup holder, counted twice already in the parking lot under the one flickering light. The window slides open, and the kid working it doesn't look at you. Not rudely, he's just tired, and you're order number 200 and something tonight, and there is nothing about you that separates you from the last 40 cars. This is the bottom of the read, and here's the thing, nobody tells you about the bottom. There isn't one. Nobody's reading you here. You're not being judged for what you can afford because everyone at this window is assumed to be exactly where you are, broke, hungry, in a hurry. The kid hands you the bag, says, "Have a good night," in the flat voice of someone who said it 400 times today, and that's the whole interaction. No performance, no warmth, no judgment either. You drive off eating fries with one hand, and you don't think about it again for years. But something got planted that night without you noticing. You learned that service, at its most basic, is just a transaction. Food for money, nothing personal. That's going to matter later because most of what happens at the top of the wealth ladder is people trying to buy their way back to a version of that simplicity and never quite getting there. There's a version of this same window that plays out 1,000 times a night in every city, and it never changes. Nobody working a drive-thru is running a mental spreadsheet on the car in front of them. There's no time. The line's backed up to the street, the headset is buzzing with the next order before you've paid for this one, and the only thing that actually registers is whether you know what you want when you pull up to speak, or whether you're going to make everyone behind you wait while you decide. That's the entire hierarchy at the bottom. Ready or not ready, nothing else gets measured. 5 years later, you've got a real job. Not a great one, but real. Direct deposit, a badge that opens a door. Business casual on Tuesdays. You take your girlfriend to the kind of restaurant with a name in cursive on the sign and breadsticks that never stop coming. This is where the read actually starts. The host looks at you both for exactly 2 seconds before deciding where to seat you. Not the booth by the window, that one's reserved in her head for the regulars, the ones who tip 25% every single time and never send anything back. You get a table near the bar. Fine, normal. You don't even notice you've been sorted. Your server introduces herself, asks how your day's going, and means about 60% of it. She's not being fake. She's doing math. She clocks the way you're both dressed, still in your work clothes, which tells her you came straight from a job, which tells her you have a job, which is more than she can say for the table she just left. She clocks that you order water for both of you before she even asks, which tells her you're watching the bill, which is fine. Most people are. She's not annoyed. She's calibrating. Here's what she's actually doing, and it's worth naming because it explains almost everything that comes after. She's not looking at your clothes to guess your net worth. She's looking at your behavior to guess your tip. Those are two completely different things, and most people confuse them their whole lives. She's also doing something else, quietly, in the background of every table she touches tonight. She's sorting you against the last 40 tables she's had this month because that's the only data she's got, and she trusts it more than anything you tell her. The couple who dressed up for a Tuesday and ordered the cheapest bottle on the list. The guy in the expensive watch who complained about the bread being cold and left 8%. The tired nurse in scrubs, still on the clock in her head, who tipped 30 and apologized for it being late. None of that lines up with income the way you'd expect. She learned that in her first month on the floor, and it never stopped being true. You order the chicken Alfredo. She recommends the appetizer sampler, not because she thinks you're rich, but because upselling is part of the job, and you seem like the kind of table that'll say yes to one extra $10 item without blinking. She's right, you do. She checks back twice, refills your water without being asked, and when the bill comes, you leave 20% because that's what you were taught to do. She clocks that too, files it away. You've just been sorted into the category every server actually cares about, which has nothing to do with money and everything to do with, will this table make my night worth it? 10 years after the drive-thru, you're 30. You just closed on your first house and your dad wants to celebrate somewhere with tablecloths. You picked a steakhouse downtown, the kind with a wine list heavier than the menu, and a maitre d' in an actual suit standing at a podium like he's guarding something. Now the read gets more interesting because this is the level where servers start performing certainty they don't actually have. You walk in wearing the nicest thing you own, which is still just a button-down and decent shoes, and the host's eyes do a full pass. Shoes first, always the shoes, that's the tell. Every server learns eventually, because shoes are the one thing people forget to upgrade. Yours are fine, not flashy, not old. Middle of the road. He seats you at a fine table, not the best one. That's reserved for the man in the corner who comes in every Thursday and orders the same bottle of wine that costs more than your car payment. Your server arrives and does something specific. He doesn't ask if you want to see the wine list. He hands it to you automatically, opens to the middle page, and watches your eyes. This is the actual test, not what you order, where your eyes land first. If they go straight to the prices, he's already got you sorted as someone celebrating something specific, a promotion, an anniversary, a house, something that justifies one nice dinner without becoming a habit. If your eyes skip the prices entirely and land on the names, he adjusts again. You ask him what he'd recommend. This is the line that shifts things more than anything else you could say. Not because it signals money, because it signals trust, and servers remember trust longer than they remember spending. He walks you through two options, watches which one you lean toward, and steers you gently toward the one that isn't the most expensive, but isn't the cheapest either, because he's read you as someone who wants to feel taken care of, not shown off to. Your dad orders the ribeye. You order the same. The check comes to more than you've ever spent on a meal, and you pay it without doing the math out loud, because tonight is not the night to do math out loud. You leave a good tip, and the server means his thank you this time, not because the number was huge, but because you were easy. Easy is worth more to that man than rich. Easy means you asked questions instead of demanding answers. Easy means you didn't return the wine because you wanted to seem like someone who returns wine. Servers at this level have seen both kinds, the actually wealthy and the performing wealthy, and they can tell the difference faster than you'd believe. The performing kind is actually the easiest read of all, once you know what to look for. It's the guy who sends the steak back not because it's wrong, but loud enough for the next table to hear him do it. It's the couple who ask for the manager over something small, a wrong side, a slow drink refill, because being difficult feels, to them, like proof of standing. Every server at this level has a name for that table, and it isn't a compliment. Meanwhile, the actual money in the room, the man in the corner with the Thursday bottle, has never once raised his voice in 3 years of coming here. He doesn't need to. He already knows he's the most important person in the room, so there's nothing left to prove to a waiter. 15 years after the drive-thru window, you're at a restaurant where the menu doesn't have prices on it. Not because they forgot. Because at this level, asking what something costs is treated as a small, quiet embarrassment, the kind nobody will mention out loud, but everyone in the room will register. This is where the read flips completely, and almost nobody expects that. You walk in, and the host already has your name before you say it, because there was a reservation, and reservations at this level come with research. Not deep research, just enough. Are you a returning guest? Did someone mention an allergy? Is there an anniversary attached to the booking? You get seated immediately. No waiting, no scanning the room for the least bad table, because here every table is the good table. Your server does not ask what you'd like to drink. He asks if you'd like to start with something from the cellar, and he says cellar like it's a place he's actually been, which it is. He doesn't upsell. That's the tell you don't expect. At the chain restaurant, upselling was constant, gentle, relentless. Here, it stops entirely because upselling implies the table needs convincing, and convincing implies uncertainty about whether the money is there. At this level, that uncertainty has already been resolved before you walked in. The restaurant doesn't take reservations from people who can't afford it. The read happened before you arrived. So what is he actually watching for now, if not your wallet? He's watching how you treat him. That's the whole test at the top, and it's the one most people who finally make it to this level completely fail, because they assume the performance that got them noticed at the Steakhouse is the same performance that impresses here. It isn't. Here, the server who's poured wine for actual billionaires can spot a person who's rude to staff in about one sentence, and once that happens, the service doesn't get worse exactly. It gets colder. technically perfect, emotionally closed. You'll never know the difference unless you've experienced the warm version, the one reserved for the people who say please to a server the same way they'd say it to the owner of the restaurant, because to that server, in that moment, you basically are. You order without looking at a price, not because you're showing off. You've genuinely stopped thinking about it, and that's the actual milestone nobody photographs. Not the meal, the absence of the calculation. 15 years ago, you counted $4 in change under a parking lot light. Tonight, you don't do the math at all, and you don't even notice you didn't. There's a smaller moment inside all of this that most people miss entirely because it happens fast and nobody points it out. At some point during the meal, a piece of silverware gets dropped, or a glass gets bumped, and a little wine spills near your sleeve. At the chain restaurant, that's an apology and a rushed cleanup, a small crisis for the server who's now behind on 2 other tables. Here, it barely registers as an event. A second server appears within seconds, calm, unhurried, like this was expected. Nobody's flustered, nobody's punished for it later in a tip. That's not because the wine was cheap. It's because at this level, the room has been built to absorb small mistakes without anyone feeling the friction, and that absorption, more than the food, more than the view, is the actual thing you're paying for. Here's the part that changes how you see every single one of those rooms. Ask any server who's worked both ends, the chain restaurant and the place with no prices on the menu, what actually separates a good table from a bad one, and almost none of them will say money. They'll tell you about the man in a $15,000 suit who sent back a perfectly good glass of wine 3 times just to watch someone apologize to him. They'll tell you about the woman in a thrift store dress who tipped 40% on a bill she clearly couldn't afford because she used to do this job herself and never forgot what a slow Tuesday feels like when the tips don't come. They'll tell you the read isn't really about your net worth at all. It's about whether you remember there's a person standing next to the table and whether you treat that person like one. That's the twist sitting underneath every single chapter of this. The drive-thru kid wasn't judging you because nobody's judged at the bottom. The chain restaurant server was calibrating your tip, not your income. The steakhouse waiter was testing your trust, not your bank account. And the man at the top, the one who's poured wine for people whose net worth would break most calculators, he's not looking at your shoes anymore. He's looking at whether you say thank you and mean it. Money buys you the table. It buys you the wine list, the reservation, the seat with the good light. What it has never once bought at any level, on any night, in any restaurant, from the drive-thru to the place with no prices, is the read. That one, every server writes for free, and they write it about you in the first 4 seconds, based entirely on something money was never going to change. So the next time you sit down somewhere, anywhere, ask yourself which read you're actually getting, not the one about what you can afford. The one about who you are when nobody's tracking the bill.